Okie doke. Welcome back to Forestry 420, Park and Wildland Management. So last week on Wednesday, if you were here, we had this, maybe it might have felt like this sort of meandering, sprawling tour through this grand unification of social theories the past 40 or 50 years, including the theory of planned behavior, experience use history, place attachment, place bonding, and how those can kind of fit together to help us understand when our visitors show up, they're showing up for reasons, and they're going to do a bunch of stuff in places. What do we do to prepare for that? How do we work with them so that we can protect and manage the habitats involved, the activities, the opportunities, the experiences hopefully involved, and so on and so forth, so that it's not just wild, swirling chaos when 3.5 times as many people show up to your and the other national parks in the system each year than show up to the most popular destinations tourism-wise in the world. So, have you guys and gals ever been to Disney? Disneyland, Disney World, on a Disney cruise, to the Disney island they own in the Caribbean, to Disney Paris or Tokyo? Everybody? Yeah, a bunch of us, all right? The National Park Service alone handles more than 3 times the total annual visitation of tourists to Disney. That's a big deal, and Disney is pretty well geared out for it. If you've ever been to any of these places, they put on a pretty good show, right? Everything is, at least in the case of Disney in Orlando, Florida, the entire landscape is reclaimed swamp, and it's all armored up with brick and asphalt, and the environmental consequences of having millions of visitors a year in that particular space kind of small, at least in terms of direct on-site impacts. Now, the consequences of hosting tens of millions of people in Orlando and 75,000 employees, pretty big in terms of like carbon footprint and stuff like that, right? Another conversation for another day. But all that to say, Disney is ready for these people. They're hoping they get as many people through that gate as possible so that they can manage them very tightly and insulate them at a very basic level from the impacts that they can possibly cause to that environment, so that Disney World is still in great shape for the next day, because that place is open pretty much 365 days a year from dawn to after dusk for pre-park events like weddings. There are an average of 3 weddings every day, 7 days a week, just at Disney World, all year round. And that happens before 10 a.m. And those weddings are done and fully packed up and gone the moment those front gates open at the far end of the park. My wife and I got married in Epcot in 2011. It was interesting. It was pretty cool. So, if we're going to work with the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, United States Forest Service, Camp Ondasana, we got to be ready for more than Disney deals with. Like a lot more than Disney deals with. And this is a big part of how we actually do that. Okay? So, once we kind of get this workflow worked out, this is going to be really useful in just kind of walking through, as we finished our class last Wednesday, in taking any particular spot, we'll call it a site, in your park that has a particular natural feature that draws people to it. Some rare, outstanding, or fantastic, unique opportunity, rock formation, wildlife species, migration pattern, whatever it is. That's going to be our site. And our people are going to bring their presence, their activity in that place, and their preconceptions, their beliefs about that place relative to their experience use history. We haven't really covered UH or experience use history yet. We'll get there today. And they do stuff. And the stuff that they do is wholly governed by their internal state, their perceptions, their attitudes about you, the Park Service, their attitudes about what it means to be a recreationist of that particular stripe. Oh, this is something that hunters have always done, and we can't do it here, so you guys are making it weird. The Park Service is making it weird. They're blocking us from what we have opinions and attitudes about. Like, this is what I read in my Outdoorsman magazine, or my Rock and Ice magazine, or my Transworld Skateboarding magazine, or whatever. Not that people read magazines anymore, but you get the idea. Okay? So, all this to say, this is a huge part of the only differences between humans and wildlife species. So if we get pretty good at wildlife management, and then superset those techniques like trank darting, rocket netting, stuff like that, with an understanding of how human wildlife is different and additional to wildlife management, we're going to get pretty good at this human management stuff, okay? I should note, I'm kind of throwing shade at Disney. They're fine. Disney has actually funded over the years a lot of research on how to manage guests and visitors very effectively, and they are a world-class operation in terms of advancing the state of the art on how to do this stuff a little bit better. For them, there's absolutely the profit motive. For us, maybe working in the public sphere or working with Disney, whatever you do you. We don't really have a profit motive. We do actually have a preservation motive, which is a higher standard, right? If we don't quite hit our profit targets, as Disney or whatever, okay, that's rough. Let's talk about some new advertising campaigns or some discount programs or whatever to get more people through the gate. But if we don't quite hit the target on preservation, which is our mandate as the Park Service or whomever else, bigger issue, right? Any kind of permanent impact or impairment, as it's called, is going to be a serious issue that folks for generations are going to have to deal with. Okay? So, we are still today dealing with some of the management decisions that were made back in 1920, 1910, 1873, when some of these first parks were created a little bit before the National Park Service itself was. Okay? Cool. So, any questions about the core theory of planned behavior thing that we spent a bunch of time on Wednesday going through? This part right here to here. From attitudes, beliefs, perceptions, and perceived behavioral control on through expressed behaviors and kind of put it on consequences and outcomes and stuff like that. Any questions on that from last week? All right, let's pack up your stuff. We'll head outside and we'll head out to this area here and maybe either hang out there for a bit or walk around some more. Take a picture of the chalkboard. Focus somewhere here. Just put it. And here we go. Cool. All right, so we finished off our last class session kind of walking through just one imagined example at your chosen national park this semester to kind of take one individual or one group of recreationists through a single experience, through a single activity on site at your national park. And that's really important to do with everything we're talking about in this sort of chunk of the class. We're trying to sort of peel open the minds of our visitors, our recreationists, our guests. But it's really important to remember that none of this stuff is happening in a vacuum. It's not happening on a chalkboard. It's not just happening in somebody's head. This is all spatially explicit. It's happening somewhere that is real, that has vulnerabilities, fragilities in some of its resources, potentially, relative to the activity expressed on site. It's explicit in time. This is happening at a specific time of day, most likely, right? We tend to start our hikes between 8 and 10 in the morning at most national parks. Sleep in maybe a little bit, have some breakfast, either down at the lodge or pulling ourselves out of our tents or walking from one end of the RV to the other. And then it's like, wow, daylight's a waste and it's a beautiful day. Let's get outside and do this thing. And so en masse, anywhere from, what's the peak visitation moment to moment at your park? 20,000 people, 30,000 people? If 20,000 people are all starting their hike in a relatively short morning window, well then, that means something. That means something specific with respect to this whole diagram that we just were taking a look at, okay? So, again, as we're going through this experience use history part of this big flow chart, we want to remember all of this is not imaginary people in terms of a class exercise. It is all real people. Every one of us has an experience use history profile, okay? Every one of your visitors, whether that's 10,000 or 5 million visitors a year, they all have specifics. It's all explicit here, okay? This is not an intellectual exercise. This is the day-to-day work. So, experience use history is pretty much what it sounds like. So, theory of planned behavior, and we're linking to it this experience use history on the arrow that connects back from the outcome. So, at the right end of our flowchart today, the outcome of the experience that gets added into sort of our mental list, our own personal history of all the times we've been hiking, and all of the places that we've been hiking, and all of the people that we've been hiking with. We're hiking solo, and so forth. Okay? So, we go through this whole activity, and then we reach the trailhead at the end of the hike, and we go back to our campsite. We go to the restroom, we go to the gift shop and get some ice cream. We go do whatever it is, sort of the aftercare of a long and intense day hike at your national park or wherever, okay? And then right as we step off of that trail, your brain is already starting to do kind of that arrow back to the left side of our chart that was talking about perceptions and beliefs, all the upstream stuff for the next time you go hiking. Right? So, how many guys and gals have ever been on a hike anywhere that it was okay-ish weather before you started, and sometime out on the hike it just started raining cats and dogs? Show of hands? Yeah, me too. Many times, okay? So, how you respond during that hike is heavily preconditioned by your understanding of what makes a good hike. Okay? So, let's think of a couple of the different kind of self-talk messages or different ways this internal conversation in our heads could happen as we're splashing along. When I hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2004, it was a medium to slightly dry summer, but we still walked through a lot of rainstorms on that ridgeline. And one of my through hiking buddies, his trail name was Squish, because he was kind of famous for kind of skipping along in the rain, just going squish, 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 because the mud had overtopped his low hiking boots, and you might as well make a game if you're out there in the mud embracing the suck, as they say, right? What might be some other narratives going on in your head? You're hiking along, it's raining really hard, maybe it's even thundering and lightning too, right? That happens with some storms. What kind of stuff could people be thinking in that moment? Open question.
Well, I know when that happens to me, this might be a weird connection, but I think this must be like what cavemen felt like. Just like little leather shoes and just they have to deal with it.
Okay.
That's kind of what, yeah.
So a sense of connection with deep time and previous peoples. All right. I've never heard that specific answer before. I like that.
Yeah, it's a weird connection. I don't know why I make it that way.
No, that's great. The first evidence of human civilization is not a tool. It's evidence of burial for people who survived things like femur fractures. Because you can't do that on your own, right? There was someone providing care for somebody with an otherwise totally fatal wound or injury. Okay? Cool. What else? So we've got connection to cave peoples. We've got squish, squish, squish. What other kind of stuff? And just be honest, what other kind of stuff might people be thinking as they're walking along in a rain or lightning storm in the forest along a trail?
It's like, this sucks, how much longer?
This sucks! This isn't what I signed up for, right? You know, like, none of the postcards for this place have people walking along in a rainstorm fearing for their lives. Okay, yeah. Or, this is bullshit. We could have gone to Disney instead, right? At least they have those overpriced ponchos every 10 feet, right? So, we have a lot of different ways that we can respond, and everybody in our little hypothetical here, they're hiking the same little rainy, muddy trail. Wildly different responses. And so what's driving those differences in response are prior experiences, and those prior experiences shape the attitudes that you form of, if it ain't raining, we ain't training, right? We hear that kind of a sentiment around the forestry department sometimes, or in the military. That idea came from somewhere. We inherited that, right? So, experience use history is a way for you as a ranger or for researchers on concerning this topic. It's a way for us to kind of get a handle on what kinds of thoughts might people be having. How might those thoughts from their previous trip to any other national park or our national park, if they're coming back as a repeat visit, what should we expect? What should we plan for? And crucially, how can we design, lay out, maintain, and patrol our trails relative to the kinds of things that people are going to be thinking with the wildlife encounters, the encounters with other visitors, and weather conditions? Like, what's it like to hike our trails? So, go ahead and pull out your notes. And we're going to make a simple 2x2 table. So 2 rows, 2 columns. And then labels to the left and on the top of that. And experience use history is going to help us fill in our 2x2 grid matrix. If you're thinking fourth dimensionally, like in Back to the Future, this is technically a 2x2x1x0 grid. Ask me later. All right, so label the rows low and high. So first row, label that one low. Second row, label that high. if you like, few and many, either one. Label the columns the same way. Left column, few or low, and right column, high or many. In experience use history, in its most basic form, this 2x2 grid, you can make it more complex pretty quickly and easily by adding more rows and columns. But just a low and a high on the X and the Y axes for our table, or rows and columns, if you want to call them that, same thing. To the left of our rows, write number of visits to this park, or number of visits to my national park. Same thing. And then across the top, above those column labels, label the whole column set as number of visits to all recreation places. Okay? So we got few visits to this park, lots of visits to this park, versus few visits anywhere, or lots of visits anywhere. And again, in its most basic, super boiled down, kind of simplified form, experience use history asks us to, okay, think of one or a couple of kinds or typologies of visitor that might fit in each one of these boxes. Now, a more complex table would also have 0 visits to this park. Or maybe insert a row in the middle for some visits to this park. Okay? But we're just keeping it nice and simple here. So, what kind of a 1, 2, 3 word label might we, or descriptor, might we attach to somebody who has been to your specific park once ever? And they have been to all recreation places, including your park and forests and dog walking parks and jogging around Campus Lake, right? Everything big and small. They've only ever done anything outdoor recreation forest-wise one time. That's pretty low in terms of the number of times they could have visited your park in the past, and pretty low in terms of the number of times they visited any park. So they go in the low, low square in your table. Make sense? What kind of a label might you associate with, or to describe that kind of a visitor? They've been to your park one time, and they've done anything forest and outdoor rec-wise one time, meaning their trip to your park is the first time they've ever done anything forest and outdoor rec-wise. What might be a label you'd use to describe or identify that kind of a visitor? We'd call them newbies, first-timers, FNGs, heckin' new guys. Okay. Lots of different ways we could sort of constructively or pejoratively label somebody like that. Obviously, in a professional context, we're not going to call anybody an FNG. Okay. Now, in which cell would you file a visitor who's never been to your park before, but has been to every other one of the national parks in the system, 60 plus, and more than 100 other Park Service operated units, like historic sites or Ozark Scenic Riverways, the site of our field trip, which is not a national park. It is a wild and scenic riverways run by the United States National Park Service. So they've never been to your park before, but they've been to almost all of the others and a bunch besides. What's a good label for that somebody? Newbie doesn't really fit there, right? But what might you call them? Or how might they self-identify? If they were describing to a friend in a word or two their recreation history, their profile. I'm a blank. Any ideas? When park planners and managers, so people in the planning office, superintendent, deputy superintendent, folks like that, tend to work on these teams and do this kind of an exercise, but with tons of data and stuff like that. They're coming up with these labels as well, because every park is a little bit different. Okay? So, what might we call somebody who's been to a whole bunch of parks, but never this one before? Semi-experienced, maybe even pretty experienced. Okay, cool. All right. We could call that person a collector. They've been to all of the parks. Let's say they've been to 64 out of the 65 parks, if we pick a particular moment in time when there are 65 national parks. And they haven't been to this one yet, so this is the last one. Right? It's unlikely that somebody has been to all of those parks hundreds of times, right? Ain't nobody got time for that. Sure would be nice. And they're just looking to get this last one, right? So we've got newbies, and we've got folks who are pretty experienced, or collectors, or like just the National Park Service or National Parks die hard. Like, we're going hard on all of them. Let's go. Let's check them all out. Let's get all of the different shape magnets to stick on the back of our RV. Anybody ever seen that? Right? A collector. Cool. Well, we got two other cells. So, what might be a good label for somebody who's been to your park many, many times and has been to all recreation opportunities and places the same number of times? Like, they've been to this park, your park, many, many times, but that's the only park they've really been to. It's the one that they know, and they know very well. What might be a good descriptor for somebody like that? Not a collector. They're not trying to get them all, clearly. They could have. If they've been to your park 3 or 4 or 500 times, not uncommon. What might be a situation or a label or a descriptor in which we'd find somebody in those shoes?
Local.
A local! You got it! That's a great label, okay? And so we'd pair that insight with what is their home zip code? And if it's one of our zip codes too, okay, probably a local. And if somebody has been to this park dozens or hundreds of times and they're not local, that's a huge insight. Man, this person is absolutely fanatical about this park. So local is a good descriptor for this one if they are actually local. It's easy to ask somebody's originating zip code, not particularly privacy invading. Or if they're from a little bit further away, what might be a good label for that person in this same cell? We can have multiple different similar labels in any one of these 4 cells. A local or what's a good label for somebody who is from far away but been to your park many, many, many times? Enthusiast. I love it. Okay? It conveys kind of a level of passion about that particular park. Like, if they are traveling to this park over and over and over, clearly they can afford to go to other parks, but they're not. There's something about your park that you need to realize is bringing people back over and over when they have a choice. This is a big deal. All right? Cool. So, what might be some good labels for our 4th and final cell? Take a moment to look at the 2 labels attached to that cell, low or high, on each axis. Take a look at the labels that we've already sort of pulled out of thin air to ascribe to real people visiting your park. How can we fill in that final cell?
Rich.
What do you mean?
They have enough money and free time to go to so many parks so many times.
Yeah. People of means. The 1%ers. These folks could also be described as enthusiasts, but maybe there's something even like extra above enthusiast? I don't know, right? So, in practice, we put a little bit more specificity into these descriptors, these bins into which we want to sort our visitors, so we can get insights about how we need to prepare to receive them as visitors and how we need to manage our physical landscape on site and so forth. All right, cool. So, is this making sense to everybody so far? All right. One additional label that is often sort of incorporated in some form into an experience use history profile for a park is a novice. That is somebody who has maybe been to a few places and it's their first or second time at your park. Like, they're not a total newbie. You don't have to do as much sort of figurative hand-holding with that person, but they don't necessarily have all of the experience, all of the skills, all of the safety orientation and the leave no trace land ethic and so on and so forth. Okay, so a novice is somebody who's not a first-timer, but maybe that visitor, and there might be a lot of visitors like this, who know enough to be dangerous. Yeah? Okay. So, if anybody's familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, this is the person that we want to address with information and education to help them understand the real dynamics of this place instead of what the tourism industry has been shoveling into their brains or what have you. Any misconceptions that folks might have from social media, for example, right? Early in the evolution of social media, so when Instagram and other short-form video platforms, this is kind of pre-TikTok, more in the Vine era, if you guys remember Vines. One of the things that the Park Service had to learn a lot about real fast was how a 15-second video that is geared to be viral and spread like wildfire, how that strips a lot of important context away from what is being shown. So much more than like a travel documentary or like a video profile on Disney Plus of such and such national park, right? In that long form stuff, you have a chance to say, hey, wow, this is a really beautiful, like, volcanic, opening, and, this volcano Kilauea is finally active after decades of sort of restive quiescence. That was two really big words. Sort of fitful slumber. And now it's not. So, man, this is so cool. And then people like dabbing or doing whatever goofy Fortnite dances in front of the erupting volcano. It makes for a cool 15-second video, and crucially, it's enough to trigger that sweet, sweet dopamine before the person flicks on to the next video. And so if they show up at that park, their brain has neurochemically enhanced association with let's go dancing in front of this volcano, but without the context of all of the other stuff like, the poisonous corrosive gases that a lot of volcanoes belch and so forth. Okay? So, experience use history helps us understand, okay, so if 0.0%, none of my visitors are novices, then we can devote some of our most in front of our visitors, some of that messaging to stuff other than helping them understand critical safety concerns. If anything more than 0.0% of my visitors are novices, well then, I need to I need to spend some of my prime real estate in terms of verbal communication with the ranger behind the information desk in the visitor center, or my trail patrol rangers who are intercepting visitors. They need to be trained to say certain things and just check in with our visitors about such and such safety concern that somebody who knows enough to get out on the trail but not enough to get out of the trail system safely, potentially. We need to check in with those folks very clearly and explicitly and intentionally and devote real person hours to that effort and that contact, and what specifically is said and how it's said, or on signs versus in verbal contact. All right? Cool. All right, so experience use history. Let's personalize this a little bit. For you and the Shawnee National Forest, think of the most recent time you were on the Shawnee National Forest. Not Giant City, not Crab Orchard Wildlife Refuge. Shawnee National Forest. Not Touch Nature. Not Town of Vienna, but on the Shawnee National Forest in its manifold, beautiful forms. Think of the last time you were on the Shawnee. So, what trip count on the Shawnee was that for you? Was that the first time you'd ever been on the Shawnee? Was it the most recent time? Was it the 100th time you've been on the Shawnee? And I can't even pick a specific number because I've been there so many times. Would you be low or high on the Shawnee in terms of number of visits? Okay. And then, for you personally, have you been to the Shawnee and everywhere else hundreds of times, thousands of times maybe, if you're an avid outdoors person? Or was that most recent trip to your Shawnee like the first time you ever went hiking? So where would you put yourself on our 2x2 grid for the Shawnee National Forest? Take a moment to kind of think it through. All right, any volunteers? Which label kind of fits for the Shawnee? Now, the Shawnee may have a different set of labels, right? Every park and protected area is unique and meaningfully unique. We're not just saying that to pander or whatever. Like, these places are really different from each other, right? Obviously. What kind of a label would you apply? Would you say, yeah, I'm a first timer on the Shawnee. I haven't really been on many outdoor rec things, and that was one of my first trips anywhere ever. Do we have any novices or collectors or enthusiasts or any others? Where'd you land on the chart? Grid, table, thing.
Well, I put myself in the lower left in the 2x2. I haven't been to a ton of parks, but the ones I have been to, I've been to a lot.
Okay, right on. So kind of that enthusiast space.
I put more local.
Local.
Enthusiast.
All
I
right.
like that too.
That works. You can be both. Cool. Anybody else? Local. Been there many times, and that kind of ish approximates the number of total visits anywhere. All right, cool. Good deal. Anybody else? Third person? I've been on the Shawnee many, many times, and I've been to lots of other places many, many times. Sometimes it feels like work, because I'm a forester, that's a joke. Anyway, so I would be one of those, I don't know, can we throw professional in as a label? Like, it's okay if it's your job to work on this stuff, right? All right. My wife, on the other hand, has been on the Shawnee to go hiking this many times. And she is from a first-generation Japanese immigrant background, and her family never really grew up doing forest and outdoor recreation stuff, and so her total number of trips to places is not zero, but low. So we would call her maybe kind of like a first-timer for her first trip, or a newbie, or something like that. And that's okay. She's also one of those people with, like, whatever blood type it is, where mosquitoes go straight to her and just, man, she face tanks mosquitoes super hard. It's rough. I feel for her. Anyway, what a babe. Sorry, I get distracted by my wife. Cool. So, now we've got kind of a basic sense of experience use history, yeah? It's just 4 or maybe 6 if we have an extra row in the middle, or a grid of 9 possible cells or bins to sort people into. It's whatever helps you get the job done, right? This is just a tool. There's no single sacred way to do it. Experience use history. It's also explicitly quantitative or numeric. We're asking for numbers of times that people have been here, and then we're finding some demarcation line, some split between low and high number of visits, right? The high could be 10 for a place like Gates of the Arctic. Like, it's relatively uncommon for anybody to go there, and so folks who have been more than like once, they're already in a fairly elite group of visitors to Gates of the Arctic, and so forth. But it might be hundreds or thousands of times for a local, somebody who lives next to the Shawnee, for example, and we talk about dog walking parks in this class and on summer camp. So the idea here is there's no single sacred size to this grid, and there's no single sacred cutoff for the difference between low and high. It's always context specific. Ugh. Not just dive bombing in the eye. Okay, cool. Now let's kind of locate experience use history in sort of that bigger flow chart that we had before. So we were talking about how after every on-site activity, every on-site experience, we've now got one more tally mark to add to the count of times that this person has been to this park, and to add to the total number of visits across all parks and protected areas, anything forest recreation wise, total for their lifetime. And that might or might not drastically shift the ratio and put them in a different bin, or not. Okay, cool. So the way that experience use history and the label that any particular visitor sort of interfaces with this larger flowchart is we take how that particular experience went, and based on our previous experience use history prior to the trip, we evaluate how the trip is going during the trip, and especially after the trip, during the memory consolidation phase, where we turn short-term and working memory into long-term deep storage, even core experience or core memory formation. All right? So, you go to the Shawnee National Forest and you go hiking, and it rains cats and dogs on you on the Godwin Trail, let's say. You're going west to east, hiking towards Bald Knob Cross from Inspiration Point, let's say. And it's just raining cats and dogs. And based on your prior beliefs of the Shawnee National Forest being a nice place to hike, but you're getting rained on, you might have a pretty negative response or attitude about how this particular experience is going or how it went. Man, I got the wrong kind of shoes. I'm trying to hike in these Crocs and I'm getting these crazy blisters because my feet are wet. This is stupid. The Shawnee National Forest is dumb. Surely the problem isn't me and my selection of footwear. Okay, so you make it home after that trip and you're gathered with some friends at PK's to have a beer and sort of swap fishtails and war stories about how your hike went, or if you're Razor Edge, you're enjoying a ginger ale or something with friends and talking about how your hike went, whatever. And the way that you tell that story is pretty well not quite predetermined, but it's heavily influenced by what do you think about hiking in the rain? And that belief in turn, is based on any time previously you've ever been hiking in the ring. Okay, cool. So, if somebody has a really good experience at a park, they're going to come back the next time expecting a similar kind of experience. And with the way that memory formation, long-term memory formation and consolidation works is we tend to glamorize or put a lot of attention on the negative aspects of a trip in the short term. And the older the memory gets, the more we tend to remember and consolidate the positive portions of the trip. So if somebody's most recent trip before their current one was 40 years ago, if they're old and tired and sad like me, they might have a very positive memory association with a trip that was kind of, as the youth would say these days, mid, or even Ohio. And okay, that means their expectation has drifted a little bit from the reality of their previous trip. But that expectation is very real, and it's mostly unconscious. We get to a place and we have this idea about how it's going to go. And so if it doesn't go well, oh, okay, that's not so good. So, how do we connect this to being a park ranger? We get to know folks, our visitors, to our park specifically, their typical experience use histories. We're looking for the most experienced people. We're looking for folks who aren't even real sure if this is a national park or a national forest, right? And everybody in between. And we're trying to get a sense of, okay, so some folks have a very specific memory of how this particular hike goes. So if we need to relocate a section of this trail because it's unsafe, or it's unsustainably eroding or something like that, we need to take a look at that section of the trail and make sure that the replacement around it, around that bad section of trail, isn't wildly different. Okay? And this sounds like such a nitpicky little detail, but man, you haven't seen people lose their minds at park rangers over like very responsible, normal, basic changes and updates or upgrades to park facilities. Again, facilities can be anything in the built and design environment, like trails, or the visitor center, or campgrounds, or anything in between. Okay? So, you gotta understand where your visitors are literally and figuratively or historically coming from through their experience use histories. And you can do this conversationally. You can put out surveys and ask them like actual numbers and stuff like that, right? You can just do it informally. Hey, welcome to the park. Have you ever been here before? And then recording those responses. Oh, wow, you've been here every year since 1976? Oh, you guys got married here. Where was that? Okay. Core memory for that particular family group in their experience use history. You better warn them that that gazebo in front of the lodge burned down during the wildfire last year, because you don't want them to happen upon that and get that negative surprise, right? Because, man, that gazebo was really important to them. So, even if you have to be the bearer of bad news, or something that is out of your control as the information desk ranger at the visitor center, very important spot, you can help sort of move people's expectations towards the reality of what's actually going on out there. Sound good? Cool. With things like climate shifts, we also have to think about what was this park's lived experience for visitors 50, 75 years ago as a little kid before World War II versus now. Okay? So places like Glacier are meaningfully and rapidly changing based on climate shifts. This is happening in our lifetimes right now. Okay? So that's all right. We just have to help folks understand, hey, things are a little bit different now than what you might be expecting. The ranges of our bears have shifted upslope over time as our slopes have warmed up and dried out. And there's more food supply higher up. Also, our visitors are sort of crowding the valleys and pushing the bears away from those transportation corridors. Just just so you're aware, and so forth. Okay? Sounds good? All right, cool. The next thing we want to talk about, plugging into the upstream end of this thing. So experience use history is connecting the end, the actual experience and its outcome, side effects, with attitudes and beliefs. So cycling back to the next trip's sort of flow chart in the theory of planned behavior. The next thing we want to kind of plug in upstream in terms of attitudes and beliefs is Kohlberg and Gilligan's stages of moral development. So, how many of you guys and gals have ever seen the movie or the TV shows Jackass or CKY or any of those sort of direct-to-DVD things of the early aughts? Anybody ever watched Jackass? All right. So, there's this researcher named Kohlberg and his fellow researcher Gilligan, who came up with a very sort of coarse, broad model of why people do things, just kind of as a one-stage model instead of a flow model like the theory of planned behavior. And it's called the stages of moral development. And at the zoomed out level, so a small scale level, stages of moral development sorts people into three bins. You're either pre-conventional, conventional, or post-conventional. Pre-conventional means that you do things based on an early phase of moral development most akin to early childhood, or in the cases of Arrested Development, later ages. And pre-conventional developed people do things according to a belief about a reward that they're going to get. If I do this thing, then I am paid money. Or I get this treat if I do this thing. And they avoid doing other things because of fear of punishment. If I do this thing, I'm going to get spanked, for families that go the whole corporal punishment route. I'm going to get grounded. I'm going to have to stay in my room for 3 hours if I don't do my chores, or if I leave the toilet seat up, or I don't know, whatever. That's a pre-conventional stage of moral development. You're doing things to gain reward and avoid pain, unpleasantness, or punishment. Right? It's the carrot or the stick kind of approach. Very, very basic stuff. Young childhood. Okay? There's a reason that most businesses, as far as I know, don't spank employees for misbehavior. The conventional stage of moral development is more about I'm going to do things or avoid doing things based on how I think my family is going to evaluate them and respond and provide feedback. And a little bit later in human development, how my friends think I'm going to evaluate this. Okay? So this is in terms of childhood development, this would be somebody who works hard in school and they study after school so that they can see the delight on their parents' face when they bring home a report card full of A's. Yeah? And they're not necessarily doing it to avoid getting yelled at by the teacher or singled out in front of class by the teacher. They think their family will evaluate that behavior positively, so they do those behaviors. Okay? Most everybody who is an adult lives, at least according to the theory and a bunch of survey research to try and figure out how much this actually maps onto reality. Turns out pretty well. Most people, like greater than 50% of the United States adult population, fits into the conventional level of moral development. Okay? And so after we hit age 18, move out on our own, maybe go to college, maybe trade school, maybe whatever, we tend to shift our perception value from what are my parents going to evaluate this action or inaction as. We shift that to, what would my friends think of this if I did this thing? Or I didn't do this thing, or I failed to do this thing, or refused to do this thing. And then we decide whether or not to do something based on whether that thing is viewed positively by our friends and peer group or not. Okay? So, we tend to see kind of a widening out of who we care about in terms of deciding whether or not to undergo an action. All right? So, this is kind of the latter stage, the more highly developed sense of morals, our level of moral development, versus the I care what my parents think. Okay? So we widen out from parents to tight peer group to broader peer group, like my friends and all of the people that I sort of self-identify with, my tribes. And so this is how we get things like, hey, watch this, or hold my beer is like the most quintessentially mid-conventional stage of moral development statement that humanity has invented. I mean, this is real space age stuff. Hold my beer, right? It's not just, I'm going to do something, it's, I'm doing something specifically in a social context because I think you're going to find it funny or like experience enhancing in some way. If you're at a super DIY show and you start doing back and forths, are you doing it because it brings joy to your soul to do it? Or do you think that you might get other people involved in back and forths? It's not really a dance move. What would you call it? Like a maneuver? I don't know. Yeah. A movement. Okay? Does this make any sense? Alright, so how many of you guys, not you, but how many of you guys know somebody who has ever said something along the lines of, hey, watch this, or hold my beer, and then they do something they would not have otherwise done, specifically because people are watching them. Most likely their friend group watching them. Okay? And the stories of what that person is doing or choosing to do can be absolutely everything. That is totally why we get Jackass and CKY and other things like that. We are doing things because our peer group finds them funny or value adding in some way. Whether or not it involves like throwing live alligators at one's unprotected crotch or something like that, right? Matter for debate. Okay? So, we go from I want a gold star on my chores chart on the refrigerator at home, or a gold star on my chart at school, or having good handwriting or perfect attendance or whatever, to, man, my parents are going to be pissed if I'm not home by insert curfew time. So I get home before that time so that they evaluate me positively or negatively. Without any reward or punishment, just positive or negative evaluation. Okay? We get from there to, oh man, what are my classmates going to think about this? What are my hallmates going to think about this? What are my fraternity or sorority brothers or sisters going to think about this? Okay? And if you've ever been on a forestry field trip, watch what happens after about 7:30 p.m. each night as the alcohol comes out and the campfires get hot, right? It's turtles all the way down. It's conventional moral development straight on through. And that is one of the most fun reasons for being a professor, just to watch the humanity unfold. Anyway, lots of fun stories out of that. Post-conventional moral development is where and when somebody gets beyond the sense of, oh man, I gotta make my friends laugh. Let me do something that might even be potentially harmful to others or myself to get that laugh, get that dopamine hit from that social interaction, that social transaction. Post-conventional moral development is I've widened out from or beyond family and what they think, beyond what immediate peer group thinks, beyond what my tribe thinks, out to what would all society think of me if they could see me doing this or choosing not to do something because of a higher principle or a reason or an ethic. An ethic, for the purposes of this class, is a moral decision framework or structure. So a land ethic is how we assign good or bad, a value label, to stuff like different forestry, timber stand improvement actions, or visitor management efforts, right? We can evaluate those as good or bad, positive or negative, moral or evil, based on an ethic, a decision-making moral framework, okay? So, post-conventional moral development is very rare. Like most of the time, we spend most of our calories earning that bread or that government cheese and keeping a roof over our heads and paying for medical care and all of this stuff. And that eats up most of our time and energy. Every once in a while, you get somebody who's like, no, I'm going to do or not do something because it's right or it's wrong. And other people may be privy to this decision and this behavior and its effects, or nobody at all might ever know. A person operating in a post-conventional or beyond conventional sense is making decisions according to, what if 340 million Americans could see me doing what I'm doing right now? Would I still do it? Nah, that's weird and gross. I'll hold off on this. Or, yeah, no, this is a right thing to do, even though it's costing me, or it's uncomfortable, or it's going to take a lot of effort. It's the right thing to do, is the kind of language we hear around the reasoning or justification for post-conventional actions. So, post-conventional doesn't mean like holy or unholy or not. It just means according to some higher reasoning or for all of humanity. It could also be against all of humanity. We're just saying that we've moved beyond caring what our specific immediate peer group thinks about. Cool? So, leave no trace is a behavioral ethic. It's not a series of rules. It's a common misconception. There are 7 leave no trace. They're not called rules. They're not called guidelines. Does anybody know what they're called? 7 leave no trace what? This is a hard question. They're principles. Very close. Nice. There are 7 leave no trace principles because the actual application of the rule might look a little bit different at your park versus somebody else's, and they often do, right? Different habitats, different climate, different visitor pressure, stuff like that, different activities. That's all fine. But the principle of respecting wildlife covers all of those more specific nitty-gritty place-attached thoughts or rules or restrictions. And rules are for people who need a system of rules in order to know how to avoid punishment. Right? Laws are to help people avoid punishment. You cannot legislate morality, but you can slap somebody's dumbass with a fine when they park their truck on some irreplaceable fragile ecosystem. Okay? So, rules and regulations are for our pre-conventional visitors. Somebody who, for whatever reason, they just need a clear carrot, a reward, or a clear stick, a threat or intimation of punishment for doing the wrong thing. That is the only thing that stops some people, not a lot, but importantly, folks who can cause a lot of damage in a little bit of time. That's kind of the only thing that those folks respond to. Now, the vast majority of us are, again, in this middle conventional space, right? And so a lot of signs at national parks, especially in some foreign countries, where face-saving culture, not being disrespectful in public, is very, very important. Yeah, we'll talk about signs later. And so we're trying to figure out how to be park rangers with our huge majority of conventionally developed visitors, morally developed visitors, who care what their friends think about what they're doing. And they care about what maybe some of them think their larger perceived peer group or self-identified peer group thinks of what they're doing. If we can, as park rangers, be in that second or third rank of distance, that degree of Kevin Bacon separation from the individual. Like, my immediate friends think it's super funny for us to shoot off a bunch of fireworks in our big, busy campground, but some of the other campers might not like it if they're trying to sleep or whatever, and the campground host or the park ranger or the law enforcement ranger, the forest protection officer in the Forest Service, they might not like it. So, we'll find another spot for our fireworks this year. Okay? That's where we're engaging with most of our people. And the reason that we see so much reliance, or at least visibility, of ethics for our very few, but super awesome, post-conventional, morally developed folks, is that everybody loves to have kind of a pro-social message. Won't you help us protect this XYZ, right? You're not just a visitor who's potentially stealing potsherds from our signage example on Wednesday. You are helping now to protect the park. That's a noble calling, not just a warning sign, right? Warning sign is for the folks who are still trying to get out of their moral diapers. The appeal to the ethic is for the few who will resonate with that image and not just do the right thing, but because they see it as a right thing to do, not just a way to avoid getting a fine on this hike. Those are going to be your visitors that help other visitors do the right thing because they believe in the principle. Now we're right back to beliefs with our theory of planned behavior, right? Perceptions, attitudes, beliefs, and perceived behavioral control, all leading into our next action, our next trip, our next activity, our next on-site thing, our next tally on our EUH grid. Okay? Cool. All right, so this is a lot of stuff. Out of curiosity, can anybody think of any example in your own life or in the lives of people you are closely familiar with of an appeal to an ethic? They're all around us. Can you think of a time when you've been approached with a message like leave no trace? So the 7 leave no trace principles are, oh man, stumped the professor. Travel and camp on durable surfaces. Plan ahead and prepare. Respect wildlife. Respect other visitors. Leave what you find. The other two. Terrible. We'll fix this in post. All right, and so forth. But that is one sort of ethical suite of principles. Can you guys think of any other appeals to ethic that you've ever experienced in your own life? Anybody ever been to church? Or synagogue? Or mosque? Temple? In the wisdom literature of various faith traditions, we get a lot of sense and even direct appeal to right and wrong. So, thou shalt not steal is a pre-conventional rule. It's a commandment, which is a 10-cent word for rule. Okay? The law. But greater love has no one than he who gives his life or lays down his life for another. That's an ethical appeal. It's saying not thou shalt die for your neighbor. It's, hey, set down the bullshit that you think is really important and treat people like you want to be treated, right? An ethical appeal instead of a commandment, a law, carrot or stick. Sound good? All right. So with those examples, can anybody think of any ethical appeal that you've ever been subjected to? Not subjected to, but messaged with. Sounds much more friendly. They are all around you. All right, how about this one? Hey, you guys, I know nobody does this anymore, especially post-COVID. Have you guys, show of hands, ever been to like an AMC movie theater, like IMAX or Real 3D or anything like that? All right, movies aren't dead. You ever been like there for the previews and right before they show the previews or right after the previews? The timing on that is interesting and different. There's always that short clip that's produced by the movie theater company that says, in so many words, a couple of different things like turn off your phone, no talking or texting, or like the magic of the movies comes alive when other people can see the movie, right? That's an ethical appeal. And it's as simple as that. It's like a 15-second video clip of people cozying up in the theater and eating popcorn and, you know, phones disappearing, and then there's usually lights of flowing stars and stuff like that, whatever, or like creepy Nicole Kidman, you know, post-plastic surgery going, the magic of the movies is real here, or whatever she says. I don't know. That's not a dig on Nicole Kidman. If you want to get plastic surgery, you do you. But we are awash in these ethical appeals messages, even at the movie theater, even in the restroom at Panera, right? But they don't work. At least a lot of people don't resonate with that message. They might shut off their phone screen, but they're not turning off their phones. And they're not often putting away their phones and putting their smartwatches now on theater mode and so forth. And it is not at all uncommon to see people in a movie theater popping on their phone or texting or even just like holding the phone up and getting that terrible bootleg of the movie. Because most people aren't reaching that stage of moral development. They're making more immediate decisions with the people they're at the movie with, or the people they are streaming the movie to or texting with while they just happen to be at the movie. Make sense? All right, so the insight here for stages of moral development, pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional for us in park management is how do we connect with pre-conventional and post-conventional people, all of them, because we're going to get all of them through the gates at our parks. How do we connect with all of them without everybody feeling like, man, Ranger Caleb is really carrot and sticking me. Like, he just shoved a pamphlet full of park rules in my face, or I had to walk by 3 angry-looking signs saying, do not do this, do that, do not do that, don't have long hair, no smoking, chewing, drinking, chasing girls who do, right? This long list of rules that everybody walks right by. Nobody likes reading that stuff. How do we connect with everybody across a big and meaningfully diverse spectrum of moral development? All right, so the second half of our class semester is going to be a lot of strategies and tactics for doing just that. Okay? Cool. So, the next move for us in getting to know our individual national parks is this one. Start looking for, across all the pages of your national parks website under nps.gov, start looking for all of the messaging, or any of the messaging. You don't have to create an exhaustive catalog of it, but just start looking for it and record the examples that you find in just a fresh Word document for how is the Park Service, National Park Service in our case, talking to pre-conventional moral development visitors to this park. What kind of carrot and stick language am I seeing? Visitors in violation of XYZ will be ABC. All visitors are required to get a permit to hike ABC Trail. And then also, what kind of conventional language are we seeing? And this one can be a little bit more subtle. Oddly, it's easy to spot post-conventional stuff. Moral appeal language is fairly lofty. It involves words like principle and won't you join us in helping to blah, blah, blah. And it's easy to find regulation language of you'll get a fine if you do this. That's pre-conventional stuff. But everybody in the middle, the large majority of people to your park, how do we insert ourselves in that conversation or that decision process of, I care about what my friends think is cool, and I'm going to try and do those things to impress them, get some social capital through my express behaviors at this park. Okay? See if you can find anything along a conventional line of visitor management. And then again, should hopefully be pretty easy to find the principal lofty language of National Park Service preserves X tens of thousands of acres in this park. Join in on those efforts. Okay? And create that as a separate document. Might be a half page, might be 1 page, might be a page and a half, something like that. Doesn't have to be, again, an exhaustive effort. But click through the first 24 pages on the website. Start with planning your trip, things to do at the park, activities on site, camping, hiking. Those pages tend to have a lot of languages of what you can do. They generally try not to say too much about what you should do. Right? We're not dictating to people what they should do. We're saying, hey, you can come hike, come ride horses, come shoot at our world-class target shooting complex, whatever. Okay? And just kind of catalog stuff. and we'll have this available to you on your phone or your laptop or tablet, however you're doing documents for this class throughout the semester, and we'll be adding to it as we go, as you find more. All right, any questions about experience use history or stages of moral development? It's good? Okay, cool beans. In that case, let us continue our walk. We'll head over towards Campus Lake here for a bit, see what we can find. So, one way in which this is a little bit tricky to catch conventional levels of moral development, and in particular how to catch, or why it's difficult to catch conventional levels with park visitors, and how park rangers are like modifying their own behaviors to connect with folks, is some of this stuff just can't show up on a website. So for example, we have, let's say, a park ranger standing out or making the rounds in front of a popular busy visitor center. So for those of you who are on summer camp this past summer, think about when we were at Shenandoah National Park and at the Big Meadows Visitor Center, and the young lady park ranger was giving a presentation about was it possum? Yeah, that's awesome. And she had the configuration we have right now. So for our audio recording here, I have everybody sort of arrayed in front of me in sort of a half circle formation, pretty common for public speaking and so forth. So when she is addressing us as audience members in the group, she's going to use language like you. So if you have ever been to the 60% of the continental United States, which is a possum habitat, you may have seen, a creature like this. And she holds up a picture of a possum or a stuffed, like a plushie opossum or something like that. And the kids go, ooh, ah, and so forth. But that you language is a deliberate choice. If we are, for whatever reason, trying to influence somebody's moral decision making or morally grounded behavior, and so forth, we might change what's called the power dynamic by physically rearranging ourselves relative to visitors as the ranger. And now I'm not talking at you. I'm using words like we. And instead of more of a direct sort of pointing gestural language, I'm using more of an open hand and wider spread hands because now I'm emphasizing that, hey, park rangers, they're just like us. In fact, maybe we park rangers are us. And so now, hopefully, as we evolve this guided event, whatever it is, environmental interpretation about possums or whatever, by using we language, hopefully that ranger gets you and me and all the other participants to think of, okay, so in my immediate peer group here, at least right now, this ranger is a part of that. And now, as I'm thinking about doing X, Y, Z, hopefully I'm thinking this ranger might like me to make this decision and do this action in this way, this behavior, this thing that is protective, pro-social towards a possum, or whatever the species is, or whatever the activity or behavior is. Instead of a slightly more accusatory, you should have a good time on this hike by behaving well. It's more of a, and let's have an amazing time on this hike together. I want all of us to be safe on this hike. So, if you see somebody falling behind or in distress, let me know right away so I can help us have more safe and comfortable time all together here. Yeah? It's a subtle thing, but we've gone an entire stage of moral development from you to we. And it didn't cost you a thing, right? So this is how we use some of these goofy theoretical constructs, these big old theories. And for the record, the stages of moral development has had a couple of controversies associated with it in terms of sexism and gender bias and so forth. Don't miss the forest for the trees, right? People are stupid even at universities, maybe especially, right? Like, yeah, some of us starve to death because we can't get past the pull door trying to push it in. Anyway, professors are strange, right? But in taking these big, well-researched, highly developed bodies of theory and applying them to very practical park rangering issues, land manager issues like, how do I get people to not screw with our possums near the trail or something like that, right? Changing a couple of words, changing your physical arrangement with people, changing your posture and body language and degree of eye contact and so forth. These are powerful, powerful things, right? And the reason they are powerful is because of another theory. That's like 3 theories today. Jeez, let's keep on walking. So the reason it's powerful in changing words like you to we, and changing body language from pointing to open hand gesturing, is because the content of the message matters. The payload, the words that you're saying, that matters, right? And it also matters a lot how you're saying it, how you're not saying it, all the nonverbal communication, all of the stuff like the font and the color of the text and the inclusion of stock photos versus file photos on site of actual people here versus random stock photo models doing a hike or something like that. It's subtle, but it's very powerful. So we evaluate things like, is this person near or far to me in terms of my moral decision making, in terms of stuff like this? Are they using vocabulary that I use? So I, as a professor, intentionally try to use words like Riz and, Ohio and Sigma and, what's that chin one? Mewing? No. Yeah. Huh? No. Like where you point at your chin? Mewing? I did get it right! Golly, I'm so smart. Anyway, I'm using those intentionally in a semi-ironic way because it's like most professors, right, we're too old to be using stuff like that with real validity. Right? And looks maxing. And, I don't know, GAT in summer camp? Anyway, so I'm emphasizing that it's unusual for somebody of my age, I'm 43, to be using Gen Z slang like that, especially, I mean, I'm not really using them correctly or in context at all, just as a teaching tool. But the idea here is that we're constantly evaluating what's the distance of this person to me in terms of perceived alikeness. So we're going to talk about the roots to persuasion theory to finish off class for today. So the central root to persuasion is the message itself. What is the sequence of words that I say as a ranger to you, my hikers? Or what's the sequence of words on the sign? And we can do a lot of effort to remove jargon, technical language, like binary Latin or Linnaean names for species that we talk about. We can use their common names that are more familiar to people to help that species feel more accessible as they're learning about it. If they're outside of the technical functional requirements of like a tree ID class, if it's just like a tree appreciation hike, I'm not going to hammer you with any Latin, right? That's totally counterproductive. So we care a lot about the content of the message. What words are we using? What sequence are we applying those words? How many words are we using? A sign that is for pre-conventional moral development behavior modification, saying do this or don't do that, you have 3 seconds. 3 seconds. And in my own in the field research on this stuff at Acadia National Park, it ended up being more like 2.7 seconds. You have 2.7 seconds to get a single statement across into the brain of someone to prevent them from doing something. And even then, it's up to 70% effective. That's terrible. That's disastrously bad. Right? If you have a cliff edge that is deadly, people have died on this cliff recently, and you have a 70% success rate with a sign telling people, be careful at this cliff, then up to 30% of your visitors are going to take a header off the cliff and die. And we're going to have to clean them up with a spatula and tweezers, and everybody's going to be all disappointed and gagging, and just, it's no good. Okay? So, that's called a central route to persuasion. What are the words that we're using? Either verbally, or on a sign, or on a looping video, whatever. And let's make a whole, I think this person might be coming by. Alright? Now, the bulk of the effectiveness of the communication is not determined by the words. It's determined by who says them, and how they say it, versus what they're saying. Okay? So, a truism for this class is going to be the following idea. This is not anything more hard and fast than a truism, but it is a valuable one. People don't remember what you say. They remember how you make them feel. And all of us have gotten backhanded compliments before, right? Where it sounds like they're saying something nice until you think about it and you're like, wait a minute, that's shady or even emotionally manipulative or abusive. That's not much of a compliment at all. Okay? How you say things matters a lot. So that's called the peripheral route to persuasion. So there's a real financial cost associated with paying rangers to say particular important messages to visitors. Those are the messages that your visitors are gonna get. Because when somebody in uniform is looking at you, and they're there in their official capacity, might even have a gun on their hip, you're gonna pay attention to what they're saying. And it doesn't have to be negative like that, like people are really excited to hang out with rangers and talk with rangers. You're gonna get mobbed by little kids. day one and forever after as a park ranger in a national park. And it's awesome, unless you don't like kids, like me, whatever, okay? But rangers are expensive. Bodies are expensive to keep alive. So every ranger is gonna cost between 2 and 2.5 times their salary in terms of benefits, training, all that stuff, right? Humans are expensive, and that's okay, that's appropriate, that's good. Signs are cheap, and they're way less effective because you can walk right by a sign. But there is an unspoken kind of inherent social contract of if Brandon is in uniform and he's speaking and working in his official capacity right out in front of the visitor center, I'm not going to walk right by him and not even slow down like I would the sign that says maybe the same thing, word for word, that Brandon would be saying if it was a human instead of a sign, right? So, the peripheral route to persuasion is your very, very meaningful and important and expensive choices on, am I going to convey this to my visitors with a live human being? Am I going to convey it with a sign? Am I going to convey it with a whole bunch of signs? Am I going to word those signs affirmatively, like positively, or negatively? Am I going to issue it as a command? Or just kind of be descriptive of a situation and let people kind of draw their own conclusions? Do I word it in the form of a rule? Do I take it all the way to an ethical appeal? Maybe. Do I do something in between? Sound good? All right, cool. So again, this is called the roots to persuasion theory. This is brought to us out of communication and marketing theory, or persuasive language theory, where you're trying to get someone to do good things, helpful things, sustainable behaviors on site at your national park versus just information and education, which does not have by itself any kind of persuasive or coercive element to it. All right? So, roots to persuasion is the name of the theory. The central route to persuasion is the content of the message and how you decide to word that. Or it could be the visual content of a photo you curate into the display or curate out. Okay? And the peripheral route to persuasion is how you deliver that message. Is it over a loudspeaker? Is it hidden away on an interpretive CD? Not that anybody buys CDs anymore, but a CD at the visitor center that you could play on your car's compact disc player if it's a 2006 Sienna. Or do you build and train a staff of rangers or camp counselors or whomever the visitor contact folks are? Do you build an entire personnel around delivering that message from one human being to another? Yeah? Huge difference in effectiveness on site of protecting resources between signs and rangers, between different kinds of signs, between different placements, orientations, sizes of signs, and so forth. Man, this is hard stuff because it's easy to put together a message. It's really hard to put together an effective message and to keep delivering it effectively. Sound good? Part of the peripheral route to persuasion for signage is what state of repair or vandalism is that sign in? A brand spanking new sign that looks expensive, that looks real bougie or churched up. Higher effectiveness than a sign covered in tags and stickers and graffiti or carved up or just defaced. You guys ever driven by a speed limit sign filled with triple-aught buckshot holes? Okay. There are multiple messages in that sign. The direct message is, what is the posted speed limit for this area? And then there's a whole lot of social commentary to the tune of each one of those triple-aught buckshot holes. All right? That's a whole lot of 9mm equivalent projectiles on a sign all at once. And you get a sense of, okay, so this is what the government thinks I should do, And then on that same sign, this is what local people think you do here. And clearly, people are actually doing it. So, that triple out buckshot is part of the peripheral route to persuasion of that sign. And it's not the Department of Transportation's fault, but it is their responsibility to manage the fact that people are shooting at those signs. You got to replace them. You got to post law enforcement agents near those spots where there is a flurry of activity of shooting at signs and interdict those people and put humans in harm's way to stop other people from shooting in a wildly dangerous way. Okay? Cool. So, central versus peripheral routes to persuasion as a form of persuasive communication versus information and education, which is just focused on the factual and interpretive content that you're trying to deliver as a park ranger to your visitors. And they provide their own decisions out of an information and education context. Okay? Cool. So, a teacher is going to provide you a lot of content. A coach is going to provide you a lot of persuasive communication. Okay? There's a difference between those two things. Although they're kind of parallel professions, they're working on different parts of your brain. Sound good? All right, let's end class with maybe trying to find any examples of direct or indirect routes to persuasion, maybe around the Bucky Dome signage or nearby with the Frolfing course. Sound good? Then we'll end the class with that. No, we won't. It's 3:45. Let's pick it up there on Wednesday. Sound good? All right, we'll end class a couple minutes early. I'm around for questions. And, yeah. Cool. So, again, your assignment, head back to your park's website. Look for and record examples of pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional messaging to the visitors of your chosen national park for the semester. Throw that in a fresh document, and we'll call it good. All right, no reading assignment for today, but they're coming. So make sure you got the textbook or downloading the PDFs off of our course website. Sounds good. All right, that's it. See ya. I'm around for questions. Dang, ran out of time. I hate that. There's so much. What's up?
So for Isle Royale, for the principles and norms, like how to behave, like when you first hike there, like when you first get there before you go on the ferry, they'll say like